Hi, I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I am delighted to welcome you to this national conversation, Genealogy and the Next Generation. I'm honored to have the support of your local PBS station and thankful for you being here today. Now I'd like to welcome our friends from Detroit Public Television to say a few words.
Thank you, Professor Gates, and hello to everyone this evening. I'm Rich Homburg, President and CEO of Detroit Public Television. Thank you for joining this Finding Your Roots virtual conversation about the importance of bringing older and younger generations together to record and preserve family history. We're excited to co-present tonight's national event along with our fellow PBS stations across the country. Detroit Public Television is the community-supported PBS member station serving Southeast Michigan. We're also the engagement station that manages PBS Books, a multi-platform national initiative using digital programming, author interviews, and live coverage of important literary events across the country to ignite passion for reading everywhere. Like all PBS stations, DPTV provides open access to trusted, balanced, and inspiring content while fostering enriching conversations in partnership with the richly diverse communities that we serve. Year in and year out, Finding Your Roots reigns as one of our most popular shows here in Detroit. Professor Henry Louis Gates is considered a folk hero. Season 9 premiered in January, and new episodes air Tuesday nights on DPTV and on PBS stations across the country through April. You can also find Finding Your Roots on the PBS app and at pbs.org. For more information about the series and upcoming conversations like this one, please visit pbs.org/Finding Your Roots. We hope you enjoy tonight's conversation.
My heart is racing right now.
Fasten your seatbelt.
You're uncovering the truth.
These are consequential things.
Yeah.
Oh, look at everybody.
I feel the presence of all these people.
I've got history.
I wish my ma could be here to see this.
Amazing.
It's like the most vital stuff, right?
Hello, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Sonal Prakash, a PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs alumna and a current student at George Mason University. I'm thrilled to be serving as a moderator for Genealogy and the Next Generation, the second installment of the Finding Your Roots National Conversation Series. The branches of everyone's family tree reflect different kinship connections, not only ties of blood, but also love, marriage, adoption, surrogacy, fostering, and donor assistance. The American root system spans many countries and cultures. Mapping out a family tree can be complicated and daunting. It's hard to know exactly where to begin and who to talk to. This discussion will explore how each generation can help preserve family history and how extended family networks, family photo albums, cultural traditions, and storytelling are all critical sources of information. Genealogy is a team effort. It also offers a chance to look at the past and consider the future. How will subsequent generations honor and add to your family tree? Before we begin the conversation, I want to say hello to everyone joining us live and participating in the chat. Whether you're a seasoned genealogist or an amateur just starting your own research, welcome. We received many questions from the registration page, and we'll do our best to address your questions during this conversation. We also have moderators from the National Genealogical Society and Afro-American and Historical Genealogical Society to help answer questions in real time. I want to introduce you to our panelists for this conversation. First, we have Naima Blanco Norberg, a sophomore at Yale University who will discuss her own deep dive into researching family history. We also have Thomas Allen Harris, critically acclaimed interdisciplinary artist, filmmaker, and professor at Yale University who is teaching the next generation of family archivists and genealogists. And last but not least, Akosua E. Moore, a lead genealogist for Finding Your Roots. Thank you all for being here tonight. Genealogy can bring the past to life, sometimes in surprising ways, and spark a sense of deep connection to something greater. For many people, this journey begins with a family photo album. Thomas, your career began in photography. Why do family photographs and family photo albums matter?
Wow. So now they matter tremendously. And the reason why is the family album is what allows us to pass the story down from one generation to another. Um, the family album also allows people to connect across different, not only generations, but also different geographical spaces. You know, moving from the old country to the new country, from one part of the country to another part of the country, and it provides a kind of a way of cohesive storytelling around the family's narrative. And it's also very much community storytelling because it's a kind of additive project in which everyone whose hands touch the family album contribute to the story. And so it is really such a powerful tool. It is for me very much part of folk art, like what gets put in, what gets taken out, how it's structured. And I'm saying this at the same time, it's now archaic because when social media began, we stopped adding to the family album. We stopped this kind of practice of creating this document of the family. And instead, we're putting things in social media, but we don't have we've lost a certain type of coherence. And so, in that way, it's kind of exciting to have the rise of more accessibility in terms of genealogical kind of work so that you can kind of help fill in some of those gaps. But I also come from a family of photographers, so so it's a place for us all to add our stories and our narratives. And I've made, in fact, a career out of the family album that was passed down to me by multiple generations. I've for over 3 decades, I've used them in my films.
And how can these family photo albums connect the family across the generations and across all those gaps you're talking about?
Well, they can inspire people to begin investigations. There is something very powerful in looking at a photograph and returning to that photograph. And particularly of an ancestor or someone who is part of a family, part of a clan, and stimulating stories and investigations. And so when I teach my course, I teach a course at Yale. It's actually 2 courses rooted in the family album. And one is Family Narratives, Cultural Shifts. And it's a course that helps students to understand their ancestors and themselves as historical agents. And so they are encouraged to remix their family archives with public archives to tell larger stories of social movements. And it's been incredibly rewarding. We have students doing blogs and writing papers where they analyze films and incorporate their own stories as well, and doing something creative or something that is scholarship around the family album is so generative because it allows you to not simply look and hear, but also to create out of that.
Wow, that's really amazing. And what actually inspired you to create this course at Yale, the Family Narratives and Cultural Shifts course?
Because I'd been working in like over 3 decades and exploring my family album. I don't begin a film saying I'm gonna go to my family album, but somehow my family story is connected to all these different things. And so it's been really it's been a kind of anchor for me. And so I wanted to help students have access to some of the methodology that I've developed over the last 3 decades and use it in their own investigations and take it forward, if you will.
That's amazing. And that leads to my first question for you, Naima. Last fall, you took Thomas's course, Family Narratives and Cultural Shifts. Did you already have an interest in genealogy, or was there something in particular about the class that intrigued you to take it?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, first of all. Yeah, so I've always been close to my ethnic roots on all sides. My mom is Mexican and my dad is Chinese and Swedish. And throughout my life, I've been raised around all of these cultures as well as in Native and Indigenous communities in the San Francisco Bay Area. But I feel like the first time I actually started to have an interest in learning about my histories was in 8th grade. There was this framed poster in my family's kitchen with the Marcus Garvey quote, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." And of course, I'd always seen this poster just in my kitchen, but in 8th grade, I feel like I was finally at an age where I could really understand the importance of honoring where I come from, and I started to become interested in, like, what this quote meant and how I could really, put it into practice. And it was also around this time when my popo, my grandmother, had compiled and uncovered a lot of archives of our ancestors immigrating from China and working on the Central Pacific Railroad. And she was doing presentations on her research and participated in projects around descendants of the railroad. And she would share her discoveries of the railroad ledgers with my great 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 grandfather's name on them, that she found at railroad museums with me and with our family. And I feel like really learning about the histories, the hidden histories of our ancestors was really fascinating to me. And later on in high school, I feel like I really began to talk more with my popo about our genealogy and get more interested. So I remember last semester when I was looking through all of the courses offered in the fall, and I had stumbled upon Professor Harris's course, Family Narratives and Cultural Shifts. Um, I really loved the course description because um, it just spoke so much. It spoke to what I was already interested in. And I remember in my request to join the course, I said that I had recently been doing a lot of work around listening to and gathering the oral histories of my family. And I said that I was interested in documenting the familial narratives, and that the course content was very intriguing because I would learn how to look into filmmaking and how it can be an agent of change and how it can speak truth to power. And I also expressed a desire to learn about how to build my own archive of family narratives for future generations. So yeah, I had not yet taken a film course, but I was open to learning about a new medium of art and storytelling.
Thomas, did you notice any interest of these students and kind of that variation between all of them? Do you have any anecdotes to share?
Yeah, the one of the things I have noticed is that more women and non-binary folks as well tend to take the class. I think we had just one or two men in the course, and so that's been very interesting. I think the idea of family is very resonant in terms of young people. Maybe it's gendered in a certain kind of way, and or maybe it's just the institution. Maybe a lot of the guys would take more economics courses and, like, do things that they think are gonna kind of maybe externally kind of building themselves as in terms of gender. Um, but a lot of the students also have a foot in one foot in one culture and a foot in another culture. So they're bi and multicultural, in the context of their families. And I think that tension is very creative and allows for them to be able to see things in very different kinds of ways. And I think it sparks a desire for kind of unification across that difference. Whether it's, like Naima is Mexican and Chinese. We have several African students who were their parents were born in Africa, they were born here, or they might have come over. We have one Japanese and Swedish student in the fall course, and so I think there is a kind of a desire to create a new way of understanding themselves as Americans, and that their reflection validated in their narratives, and and so that's been a very big thing. I don't know if Naima would agree, but I think that was something that seems to pull and pull people to the course as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, the youth, it's so important to engage the youth in this conversation. And we actually received a question from Margot in North Carolina who asked, how do we engage youth and get them to actively participate in genealogical research? What do you think, Naima?
I think a great way to engage youth in genealogical research is to really just start the conversation with your family members and your community members, to tell stories, to bring out the old photo albums, and just talking about where you come from and why you are the way you are is a great way to include the young people in conversations about history and genealogy. And I think learning about your ancestors in is even more exciting when you learn about the context in which they lived. For example, for me, learning about the deep roots of my family has had in the California Delta was very interesting, but I feel like it was even more captivating when I was reminded of the rampant racism and the anti-Asian sentiment that was in Central California throughout the 1900s, and hearing that my great-great-grandparents ran a general store and gambling houses in this time, which supported the Chinese community in that area, was even more empowering.
And I want to ask Akosua now. You began your genealogy journey at the age of 14 when you first made your first family tree. And now you're a lead genealogist on finding your roots. What inspired you to actually pursue this interest about your family history? Did you ever imagine that it would become your whole career?
Um, Actually, a career, no. The family tree was a part of a cultural coming of age that I was a part of. It was an assignment that was given. And this was something that was important to understanding who I was as a young Black um, going to be or moving towards womanhood in Harlem, New York. And so, um, that was the assignment. You need to start a family tree and you need to think about who it is that you are going to question and what questions you are going to prepare, to speak to your elders. And I only had two. I had my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandmother. And so, and they have two totally different personalities. And so I really had to think about what it was that I was going to ask them. And they were both from the South, but both of them ended up in New York City, in Harlem, New York. And so, um, once I started started really preparing those questions and I actually needed help. I needed help from my parents on, what, what I should ask because I had no idea. It wasn't an experience that I had ever had. I just was always around my grandmothers, but I never really thought about where it was that they came from. And so once I prepared those questions and they provided the answers and the family tree started, it was like, whoa, there's a lot here. There's stories. There were whole lives, that took place that I had no idea about. And so the experience of creating that family tree was absolutely wonderful. It became not just an assignment, it became something that I knew that was going to be attached to me and the rest of my family forever. And so, we had our program and, I became a woman, at 14. And then that book that was created, we created an album and the album that was created sat around for a very, very, very long time. But in the meantime of gathering with family members and going to family reunions and things like that, it kept my ears open so that I knew that once I heard a story, and if that story was repeated, and if it was repeated again, or if it was something was a little bit different, those are the things that I needed to pay attention to. And we did. My family was always around each other, and they always talked. My grandmother basically she was the pillar, the holder of she held those stories and she told those stories. And now doing genealogy, I'm realizing she was the only one that did. And so we are very, very lucky. My family is very, very lucky. And so that's what really, really inspired me to continue to, once I was in those environments where there was family around and we were having such a good time, I knew that these were the things that I was going to be able to talk about and to experience. And these were the settings that I can continue to ask questions in. And so I stayed, those things sat aside. But I tell you, once these online programs became available where you can start searching, for your family members and these names and places that you had, picked up on through oral history, it was like, boom, now I'm going to see, what I can get out of this, what's true and what's not true. And those family trees those leaves can start growing and growing and growing.
Wow, that's really amazing that you had such a great connection to your grandmother and that you were able to learn about that. And speaking of family oral histories, let's take a quick look at this clip from earlier this season when Edward Norton learns that his family lore appears to be true. His 12th great-grandmother is Pocahontas.
Pocahontas is indeed your 12th great-grandmother.
Oh my God.
I understand that was family lore. Well, it is absolutely true.
And how could you possibly determine that?
Through the paper trail.
It would have been documented, their paper trail of their children.
Of course. John Rolfe and Pocahontas got married on April 5th, 1614. Shakespeare dies in 1616, just to put this in perspective.
Married in North America, or he had taken her back to...
No, in Jamestown, Virginia.
Virginia.
Pocahontas died sometime in March 1617 in Gravesend, England.
England, right.
And John Rolfe died around March 1622.
So they were married in 1614.
1614, when Shakespeare was still alive. But you have a direct paper trail, no doubt about it, connection to your 12th great-grandmother and great-grandfather, John Rolfe and Pocahontas.
This is about as far back as you can go.
It's as far back as you can go.
And that's it, unless you're a Viking.
Yeah, that's right.
Just makes you realize what a small, piece of the whole human story you are.
Wow, that's incredible to have a family rumor be true and have the paper trail lead so far back. Naima, I'd like to ask you, since you've just begun, and perhaps you have some advice for both newcomers and young people interested in genealogy. Where should we start, and how do you keep up that momentum?
So I would definitely reiterate that the first step is in getting your family members interested in this research is for the elders and for the adults to be open to sharing their oral histories in the first place. Another way my family connected my cousins, my brother, and I to our history was also by bringing us to the places where our ancestors lived. When I was younger, we visited the old family home in Cortland, California, and saw where the general store used to be. And I understand that many people don't have access to physically going to the places where their ancestors lived. But I feel like if you do have the chance, it is a very valuable experience to literally walk in the same, on the same ground that your ancestors once did. I believe it's also important to keep young people engaged in the cultures and lineages they come from through family tradition, whether that be through cooking and eating together, praying, family gatherings, dancing, or whatever it is. Do not underestimate, the power of cultural and ethnic traditions. My family celebrates Qingming every year, where we visit the cemetery where our ancestors are buried, and we clean the tombs and make spirit plates and just enjoy the company of the family we only see once a year. And even though we're only there for that one day, we keep our traditions alive, and so that the younger generation can continue them in the future and not forget the importance of honoring where we come from.
Wow, that's really important, especially to keep that going. And let's talk about the research aspect of this. So Thomas and Akosua, we had a number of people write in feeling overwhelmed because they never met biological family members, or elders simply didn't want to discuss the past and time with them just ran out. Where can people begin if they're starting from scratch?
Well, I could start. I started interviewing my grandfather when I got my first video camera, and I was in my, I think, early to mid 20s, and I interviewed him for 2 hours straight. And he spoke almost exclusively about his parents, his grandparents, his great grandparents. And it was powerful. My mom was there with me, and we were able to record the story. And I come at it from the perspective of a filmmaker, storyteller, and artist. So there's a connection with genealogy, but it's also kind of to the side of it in some ways. Um, it has a lot to do with, like, wanting to, kind of tell stories and validate my experience. And so I've used that interview in a couple of different films, including a film I made about Black photographers, Through a Lens Darkly, Black photographers and the emergence of a people, as well as another film, That's My Face. And this is really a great story. My mother asked me for the transcript of that interview about 12 years ago, and she began writing historical novel and really has been doing the research. And the novel came out right before COVID, and it allowed her the opportunity to really do extra research. So even though it wasn't necessarily in the service of, building the family tree, it did allow her to understand, like, what was going on 100 years ago. And in fact, right before COVID, when the book came out, she was talking, the book actually came out when the book was focused on the Spanish flu and how that influenced our family. Several family members died. My great grandmother was in Albany at the time and raising my grandfather, and her husband was part of the 369th. And so it allowed us to understand ourselves in this larger scheme of things. And so that's, pretty amazing.
Myself, in regards to keeping the youth or younger generations interested, I'm going to kind of go back. I just left teaching in May of 2022, but I taught mathematics in the high school level for 19 years, part in New York and part here in Georgia. And since I've been in Georgia, it's been probably the most active part of my genealogical lifestyle. And one thing about working with students is there's a lot that they just don't know, And so at the introduction of each semester, we would, talk about ourselves, and I would have to introduce myself as their new teacher. And I literally would just be like, I know how to teach math. I know how to teach math because my mom was a math teacher and my mother taught me how to do math. Do I love it? I may not love it, but I know how to teach you math. What I do love is genealogy. And they did not know what that is. They don't know what genealogy is. And so I had to explain to them what genealogy is. And then they're like, well, what do you do with it? How do you go about it? And I would tell them that if this is something that you want to pursue, then I will definitely show you. But in the meantime, throughout the semester, there will be opportunities for us to watch a show, for me to dig. I'll let you take out your cell phone and call someone so that you can ask questions. And so that was my way of introducing to them what it was that I loved, what it is that I do outside of teaching mathematics, and how they can start having conversations with their parents and their grandparents. I mean, literally, sometimes, I finish a lesson, I give an assignment. It's not necessarily downtime, but now it needs to be, it can be quiet. We can turn off the lights. I can turn on the Promethean board and put on Finding Your Roots. And then they're like, oh, this is what she's doing. And then they're like, oh, Miss Moore, well, can you do that for me? And I'm like, absolutely, I can help you. And then what do I need to do? Oh, you need to make some phone calls. You need to call your mom right now, call your dad right now, ask them anything, you need to ask about your grandparent. Do you even know who your great grandparent is? You're only 16. So now I need to know if you know who your great grandparent is, your great great grandparent, where were they from? Where were they? And so those are the things, that's what they would do. They would get on that cell phone. And that's the advantage of working with these youth right now. They know how to, they have an opportunity to use their phones and use the internet and these online platforms in order to get information a lot more quicker and faster than we did, when I was 14 years old. You had to have a tape recorder when I was 14. You had to have a tape recorder and the tape, and you had to press play. And if you were doing that interview on the phone, you had to have the recorder next to the phone, so that you can record the conversation. So it's a lot different now. And that was my opportunity to introduce the younger generations to what it is that I do with genealogy. As far as my children are always with me when I do presentations. Kimberly Morgan, who also is a lead genealogist for the show, her and I started doing presentations in Beaufort, South Carolina in like 2015. And, the children, we would be packing up all of these materials and things like that. And the children would be at the presentations, and this was their opportunity to actually look and see and feel and experience genealogy the same way everybody in the audience did. And after so many presentations, they knew exactly what slide was coming next. Or, one time they got up and, moved our little panel board, to the next board that, because it started to, become part of the story that they knew. And that's what I want. I want to be able to do this differently than I experienced when I was young with my grandmother. And my grandmothers. And so I love telling these kids, I love genealogy. And when I quit my job in May, they were like, this is unbelievable, Miss Moore. We've listened to you talk about what you do all of this time, and now you're leaving teaching to do this full time. And, I had to tell them, it's follow what you love to do. It's the greatest experience. And sometimes it may not last forever, so you need to take a hold of it right there and then. And this is what I love to do. And so I talk in an inspirational way to them. And so it keeps them interested in what it is that, and they send me emails, oh, Ms. Moore, I spoke to so-and-so, and this is what's going on. What should I do about it? Or, how can I research it? And I give them, the assistance that they need.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that you even integrated your passion into your actual work, and you introduce it to your students. I think a lot of students would have a lot of trouble with those roadblocks, and a lot of people wrote in actually asking for help overcoming roadblocks, especially brick walls that are related to researching African American ancestors. Let's take a look at a clip from this season where Niecy Nash learns more about her own family history.
In the 1870 census, we found Niecy's fourth great-grandfather, Aaron Cobb, living in Union County, Arkansas. Moving back a decade, we saw that the 1860 census for this same county contained a slave schedule for a white planter named Azariah Cobb. The enslaved people on this schedule are not listed by name. But even so, we wondered, could Azariah have owned Aaron? We found our answer in the estate records of Azariah's father-in-law.
I, Joel Brazil, being in a low state of health, but in perfect mind, do make and publish my last will and testament in manner following. I give and bequeath unto my daughter, Rosanna Cobb, one Negro boy named Aaron. I'll be damned.
So we could confirm with that will what you were seeing without names on the previous page.
That's them.
This will was written by a planter in Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. His name was Joel Brazil. It bequeaths Niecy's fourth great-grandfather, Aaron, to Brazil's daughter, Rosanna, who had married into the Cobb family.
Just passing people around, passing them down.
And he was just a child.
He was a child. That his heart is heartbreaking, you know? I don't know, it's kind of like, and it's weird because you grow up knowing what slavery is. You grow up knowing the institution. You grow up still feeling the ripple of what it is for us in today. But somehow when you can go back and read this actual document, it still feels like a gut punch.
Well, it's personalized.
Yeah.
You have DNA from Aaron. It's not some abstract concept anymore.
No.
No.
It's right here.
Mm-hmm, it's right there.
Wow.
Digging deeper, we discovered that Joe Brazil was originally from what was known as Pendleton District, South Carolina. And in the 1820 census, we saw that he owned a boy who almost certainly was Aaron. And on your left, you could see a map of Joe Brazil's land in 1825. Nisi, we believe that that's where your fourth great grandfather Aaron was born, right there in Pendleton District.
Wow.
And that area experienced a cotton boom during the late 18th and early 19th century. And the enslaved people on Joe Brazil's plantation likely worked from sunrise to sundown. And once your fourth great grandfather Aaron reached the age of 8, he would have most likely joined them out in the fields.
Yeah. Wow.
There is a grace note to this story. In the 1870 census, we found Aaron living near his son Henry. And we noticed something incredible about Henry. He was a landowner. At a time when less than 5% of all black families living in the South owned any real estate, Henry had $850 worth of property, likely amounting to hundreds of acres.
Oh man, this is awesome.
It is cool.
This is awesome.
You got it.
You know,
Industrious and save money.
Well, especially when you look at all of the hardship, all of the pain, all of the experience, all of the things you're born into, all of the, things that you've seen, witnessed, you know what I mean? And you still said, I'm going to figure out a way to take care of my family and be successful.
Right. What do you think you inherited from them?
I feel like when you can come from something so hard and that was not just hard because it was hard because it was meant to destroy you.
Meant to destroy. They made it hard.
So I used to, when I first started in entertainment, the 3 words that I would live by are no matter what. If I gotta go to an audition to be funny and I'm crying because of this or that, no matter what. No matter what, you show up and you pull up. And I feel like my no matter what of it all has a different meaning and context when I look at this. Because this is the no matter what of it all.
Literally. And if they hadn't embraced that philosophy, there'd be no Nisi.
There would be no Nisi.
No matter what.
My God.
I think that really goes to show how personal history can feel when you have that direct family connection. Akosua, could you share a little bit about your journey researching your own family history? How did the extended family members play a role? What resources and genealogical records did you find most helpful?
My journey, like you said, started when I was 14 years old. But then once we had the onset of these online platforms in order to do our searches, it really, really expanded the research. It allowed me to take the stories and the things that I knew and start, entering them into a platform that can give me, hints and provide opportunities for me to extend the story. And once, you start adding people onto your tree and you're realizing, well, there's these people, some of these people I just really can't talk to. I don't have the opportunity to speak to you on a thing. You have to think about ways to get around that. And one thing that was successful for me on 2 occasions was to try to push into parts of the family that weren't part of my direct line. Sometimes you can't always just focus on your direct line. Sometimes you have to go to the grand uncle and the grand aunts and then kind of look down and see if you find any living family members who are related to them. And on 2 occasions, I was able to do that. And I literally benefited from finding, people who I thought were living descendants of those ancestors and Googling their name and then seeing if I can find a phone number or email address online. And in both cases, I found a phone number to contact a cousin. And I called them on the phone and left a message. I was able to leave messages for both of them. And when they heard me, my message, because I'm like, oh, my name is Akuswa Moore, and I'm doing research on my family, and the family is from Charleston, South Carolina, and Beaufort, South Carolina, and this is what I know, quickly, this is what I know, and I'm just trying to check to see if you are, related to this particular person. And so I gave them kind of a snippet of, what I felt the connection was. And when they call me back, they're like in shock, because they are who I thought they were, and they were surprised that they were just surprised about this experience. But at the same time, they provided the opportunity for me to now talk to them, to talk to other family members, to meet other family members. And so it is very, very important that when we are doing genealogy, we are just not looking at just us and everybody straight up from us. We need to be able to veer off to the side sometimes and really start, digging in and seeing what you can find from that. As far as resources, aside from the people and aside from the online platforms that we use to do our searches, I really benefited early on from joining genealogy chat rooms and groups. Sometimes it's based on the location in which my ancestors lived. So if I am part of a Beaufort, South Carolina, let's say Facebook group, I'm able to look to see what's going on there, see if people post pictures, ask questions in regards to cemeteries and things like that. If I'm speaking about if I'm looking at a particular surname, they have surname groups online, and sometimes though you benefit from joining those surname groups, because you can add queries and explain where you're coming from and the ancestor that you're looking for. And even with African American genealogy, our goal usually really pretty much all the time is to see if we can get into the period of time of slavery. And so there's a point where those records with our names on it just don't exist. And if you have some kind of inkling of the area of which your family was enslaved, or if you have some idea of who possibly could have enslaved them, then you need to start digging into that family also. You can't, and that's part of the whole idea of not just sticking to just you, and just your line going up. You need to be able to veer off. And so I've benefited from also researching the family of my family's enslavers. And actually, when Kim and I did a presentation in Beaufort, South Carolina, some of those family members came to the presentation. And, sometimes you have to be very gentle with your introduction. You don't know, what somebody's reaction is going to be. But I would say, I think Naima spoke to it. Sometimes you can't get to the actual location where certain things are, where cemeteries are, where churches are, and so there are groups online that will volunteer to go to a cemetery and take a picture, to go to, it's called Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness. You can go on there and you can make a request, and somebody will pick it up and they'll go to the cemetery, take the picture for you, and help you verify whether or not this is the ancestor that you're looking for. So I really say take advantage of a lot of the online groups and the chat groups that are available to you, and take the side road sometimes.
Naima, your family has roots in Mexico, China, and Sweden. I mean, were those particular parts harder to research? Was it harder to figure out where things are from? Like Akoso was saying, like a lot of these places are hard to get to. I can't imagine you were able to go to all these places since you have such a spread out family tree. How was that like?
I feel like throughout last semester, in Professor Harris's course, I began to think more about my interest in family narratives and genealogy, and also started to question how one-sided they had been up to that point, how one-sided my interest had been, because my family has extensive documentation of our history on my Chinese side, and thankfully my popo has done a lot of research on our family genealogy very recently. And it's very rare, I might add. Many of the laborers who worked on the Central Pacific Railroad and on the Transcontinental Railroad worked unnamed on the railroad ledgers. And so my popo has shared these family trees that go back 15 plus generations. And it's great to have that. But I also realized that I hadn't yet considered my Mexican roots, and I hadn't yet talked to my family members who are from Mexico, and even considered that. So last semester was when I knew I had to speak to my abuelita, my maternal grandmother. And when talking to her, I feel like language was definitely a barrier. I can speak Spanish, but I'm not completely fluent. And so I didn't really understand everything she was telling me. But in the conversation, I also asked my mom to be a part of our discussion, just so she could add her point of view and also act as kind of like a translator and kind of a moderator. And after I had those interviews, I asked about family photos, and I was able to see, actually for the first time, a lot of old photographs of my ancestors, which made me feel much closer to my Mexican heritage and really reaffirmed my Latina and Chicana identity. So I feel like that's still the process that I am, the process and the journey that I'm going on right now is really delving deeper into my Mexican roots and connecting with those parts of my family, like Akoso said, that, great aunts, great uncles that have maybe more documentation that I may be able to talk to and get more answers from. So that's what I'm currently working on.
Well, I think that's really an important thing that you mentioned, that connecting to that roots kind of helps create that complete picture of ourselves. How does knowing about the family history help us better understand who we are? Feel free, any one of you, to answer. I'd love to hear all your thoughts.
I can start. I address this question a lot, and I think it's directly related to my journey. When I'm doing African American research, there's certain documents that you actually kind of hope for, and those are the Freedmen Bureau records, and any wills, and if your family member was a soldier in the Civil War, a United States colored troops record, pension record that also includes maybe a widow's pension. And I actually have a few family members who were USCT troops and a few family members who filled out records with the Freedmen's Bureau or the Freedmen's Bank. And those records allowed me to extend my family in a way that I could not even imagine. And I used to, when I was in New York, I had gone to the National Archives in DC and picked up these pension files. And when I read these pension files, they were absolutely unbelievable in regards to my third great grand uncle, Stephen Binyard, who was a United States colored troop. And I carried this pension file around every single day, back and forth to work, because it meant so much to me. The words that were said. His wife applied for the pension after he died, and she had to basically prove who she was. And in proving who she was, she had to get dictate depositions and get affidavits and witnesses. And the stories that the information that file provided was so inspiring, and it meant so much to me that I carried it around forever. And what I've learned from that is this whole genealogy experience in regards to myself is I find very little to complain about. There's I can't complain about some of these most simplest things, because I begin to feel guilty. And my question to myself is always, how dare I? How dare I even think that I'm, failing in some way, or I haven't done something properly, or I'm not providing something when I come from a group of people who withstood every single obstacle that they were attacked with in order for me to be here. So, my whole character has changed. I take the positive route in most occasions, because I'm always thinking about them. I'm always thinking about the sacrifices that my ancestors have made in order for me to be here. So my question to myself, like I said, is always, how dare I?
I could join in. Yeah, just really appreciated what Akosua said. It really highlighted the spiritual aspect of this kind of work. Celebrating the ancestors, but taking the inspiration from their stories, and how that could really affect us today and uplift us. And in fact, before I started the Family Pictures Institute for Inclusive Storytelling, where I was still working on another earlier project, I read a New York Times article about a study that basically said that children of families that knew their family story, that knew their family mission, were much, much better able to survive crisis and navigate crisis, because they had a sense of grounding. And that's, that's what's so powerful, and that in some ways motivates me, similar to Akosua. It's just like, in terms of with the students, it really, it's like I can help other people get access to a sense of grounding in a society which normally doesn't affirm certain perspectives or cultures or communities, and that we do have a story. It may not be in the history books yet, and it may not be as available, but it is accessible. And that is something that it's so important. Once you have the feeling that I can find out the story, once the seed is planted, then in some ways it can't be unplanted. We understand who we are. We have a connection not only with our lineage, but also with the people next to us, and our connection with people that may be my cousin, that I have a caring, I open myself up. And, going back to the first question around what the purpose of the family album, I feel like it's very similar to, this aspect, spiritual aspect of genealogy. And that is the joy that comes out of this, the connection that comes out of this as well. And so it's so incredibly fulfilling. And I think it's something that once young people have a taste of it, and especially the storytelling aspect, where they can go in and play with family photographs, and begin in their own way to look at some of this material and do some of this research, I think it's of tremendous value and benefit.
Yeah, I can only I guess reiterate what Professor Harris was saying. I really relate to what you're saying about having this grounding when you find out more about where you come from. I feel like, especially as a multi-ethnic person and growing up in such a diverse space in San Francisco, it was constantly learning about culture and heritage, but I feel like myself, I was always a little lost about where I belong or what communities I truly was in. So definitely finding out more about my history was very close to my heart, and it made me more grounded in my identity. And just, I've always been a fan of mystery, and I feel like delving into these oral histories was like uncovering mysteries in my family. When I was talking to my abuelita, I found out that my great grandmother on my Mexican side was born in Arizona, and I had no idea she was born in the US and then had moved back to Mexico when she was very young. So there are the just amazing stories that you'll find out when you start talking to your elders and talking to your family members. And speaking to, I think a while ago, what Akoso was saying around, co-creation and having it be a collaborative process. I know we were talking in class yesterday, Professor Harris, about co-creation and making, use of your resources and talking to people and finding the linear narratives in your histories. Like I can relate to my ancestor now, and yeah, finding those connections. It's really great and it's really grounding.
I think you all are really fortunate to be able to find these connections. And now we have to kind of think about how we're going to do that for future generations. What does it mean to you to leave a historical legacy, a detailed account of the past, or the family photo albums for future generations?
It's we're taking so many images, and how do we manage our archives? How do we tag things, and how do we also preserve those photographs from the past to take them forward to the next generations. Also, archives that are paper archives. I saved several archives. My grandmother saw no use in them, and so she was throwing them out. And a lot of people don't realize that that during times of transition, when a family member dies, that that we should really look at some of these archives and really try to preserve them. Store them until you can look through them. They will have, there might be a young Akosua, in the making, who really could, use this in some major kind of way, and inclusive of the family photograph, and for me, even more especially, to interview those people that that are still around, not to assume that they'll be available to us, and we're gonna like go and play one of our video games, as opposed to taking this precious time to talk with a family member about a family story, like we saw in the Edward Norton material. Yeah, clip.
Yeah, just adding on, like I said before, just in this time of digitization and so many archives are being discovered and stories are being told, I feel like it's really important to have the historical documentation to accompany these stories that were being told, because of course you don't want to pass on misinformation, and stories get embellished, and that's also the beautiful aspect of stories and about oral histories. But possessing and passing on accurate archives, especially in communities of color, is very necessary at this time. I mean, with so many movements happening and so many social reckonings, at the forefront of many minds, it's important for future generations, as the future leaders, to know where we come from, to decide where we're going.
I guess I can add on just a little snippet. I mean, because I do the genealogy work, and a lot of my work involves a lot of paper and actual, records or whatever. I think that it's just important for me to really make sure that I gather my notebooks and my notes and my binders and all my photos in a way that and organize them in a way that my children can follow, if, when I'm not here anymore, because all of this stuff is going to get passed down to them, regardless of whether or not they're going to be doing genealogy. And if they do come across a family member who is interested in doing the genealogy and holding these stories together, that these documents and all of my research is prepared for them to pass on to that person. And then also, sometimes we need to consider whether or not we are willing to donate our records to any of these universities and these libraries and museums that are in our communities. It's really, really important. They have archival, that's what they do. They keep archives. And so your documents and your papers and things that are important are now, being held in a proper way where they won't, deteriorate. And because of digitization, just like, we do that on a personal level, they do these things on a school in a larger level. And so, your items may be digitized later on, and they now may be available online for other people who are doing research. So, from that perspective, yes, gather your stuff together and organize it.
Yeah, I would have one last thing to add, and that is dovetailing on something Akosua said earlier. Sometimes the family story can also be held by people that are not related to us. And you see that in like the family album, the close family friends that kind of track with the family over generations and also hold the family story is also something that can really be helpful to people, to understanding the place and understanding particular family narratives, accessing places like cemeteries, and that type of extended family is so important in BIPOC families, and particularly African American families. I was speaking with a friend of my older aunt, and she gave me a lot of stories that sometimes the family members don't want to tell you, and they have the tea, so to speak, and they could give it from another perspective. So, interviewing those people as well, like old family friends, is also very, very rewarding and productive, generative.
Wow, thanks so much for all your insights. I think that's a great note to wrap up this wonderful conversation. Thank you all for being here, and I want to especially thank our panelists for their invaluable time and insights, and our host stations, WETA and Detroit Public Television, for putting this event together. But the conversation doesn't end here. Join us on March 8th at 8/7 Central for the next event in this series, Solving Mysteries, the Science of Genealogy, which will include lead genetic genealogist CeCe Moore.
Well, ain't there a skeleton in my closet, huh?
Next time on Finding Your Roots, David Duchovny.
I have a sense of place that I didn't have before.
And Richard Kind.
All of this speaks to, I did not get here alone.
A family's perilous journey.
I always just thought it was luck,
And hard work ends in foul play.
He was murdered.
Plus, a DNA match.
No way.
Isn't that wild?
I know him.
On the next Finding Your Roots.